Today we uncover one of the scariest mysteries hidden behind the locked basement door, a story that begins with an innocent purchase but unravels into something far more sinister. When Jenny first laid eyes on the house, she knew it was the one. A stunning Victorian-style home nestled on the outskirts of town, its grand architecture whispered of history and secrets. The intricate woodwork, the towering bay windows, and the wraparound porch gave it a charm that felt almost too good to be true. And in some ways it was. The price was shockingly low for such a house, so low, in fact, that any reasonable person might have questioned why. But Jenny, blinded by the excitement of new home ownership, chose not to dwell on it. It was her fresh start, a dream come true, and she wasn't about to let doubt creep in. The realtor's words about the locked basement door barely registered. "Oh, the previous owners misplaced the key," they had said with a casual shrug. "It's probably just an old storage space. You can get a locksmith to open it." At the time, Jenny thought nothing of it. She should have. Before we move forward, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Evil's Reach for more spine-chilling horror content. Your support keeps the nightmares coming. From the moment Jenny stepped inside, the house felt off. The floors creaked in strange places, the walls seemed to hold whispers, and at night a peculiar coldness lingered in the air. But it wasn't until the first night, when she heard that strange, echoing thud from beneath the floorboards, that she realized this house had a secret. And whatever was behind that locked basement door didn't want to stay hidden. A few days later, Jenny came home late from work, exhausted from the long shift, but relieved to finally be back in the quiet of her house. The sky outside was ink black, the streets empty, the kind of night where even the wind held its breath. She pushed the front door open, stepping into the dimly lit hallway. The house greeted her with silence and unnatural stillness that made her pause. The air felt heavier, colder, as if the walls themselves were holding on to something unseen. Then she heard it. A soft, rhythmic scratching. Jenny froze. The sound was faint but persistent, coming from just down the hall. Her eyes locked onto the basement door, her breath catching in her throat. Scritch, scritch, scritch. Her skin prickled. The noise was deliberate, methodical, like something trapped inside was trying to get out. Cautiously, she took a step forward, her pulse hammering against her ribs. She could feel her own heartbeat in her ears as she pressed her ear to the wooden door, straining to hear. For a few seconds, nothing. Then, 3 slow, deliberate knocks. Jenny's breath left her in a sharp gasp. Her body stiffened, every muscle locked in place as pure animal fear clawed its way up her spine. Someone or something was knocking from the other side. She stumbled backward, nearly tripping over her own feet as she clutched her phone with trembling hands. Her mind screamed for logic, but her gut told her something was horribly, horribly wrong. Her fingers fumbled over the screen as she dialed 911. The dispatcher answered, but Jenny's voice barely worked. There's someone in my basement," she managed to whisper. Within minutes, red and blue lights flashed through her windows. The police arrived in force, 2 officers, their hands resting on their holsters as they listened to her frantic explanation. One of them knocked firmly on the basement door. "This is the police. If someone's down there, come out now." Silence. The officers exchanged glances. Then, without hesitation, one of them kicked the door in. The wood splintered with a deafening crack, the door flying open to reveal an abyss of darkness. A gust of cold air rushed up the stairs, hitting them like a breath from something old and unseen. Flashlights clicked on, beams cutting through the dust, heavy air as the officers stepped forward. Jenny remained at the top of the stairs, her fingers clenched into tight fists, her breath shallow. Seconds passed, then minutes. The silence in the basement felt thick, suffocating. Then, finally, one of the officers called up, his voice strangely flat. "There's nothing here." Jenny swallowed hard. That couldn't be right. She took a step forward, peering down into the darkness. The basement was empty, no signs of an intruder, no broken windows, no footprints in the dust. But the air still felt wrong. The cold clung to her skin like unseen fingers. The silence wasn't the kind that brought relief. It was expectant, waiting. Because deep down, Jenny knew the truth. Something had knocked, something had scratched, and whatever it was still down there. The next few nights, the noises got worse. What had once been occasional, barely perceptible sounds, soft scratching, distant knocks, grew into something relentless, something that wanted to be heard. Jenny tried to ignore it at first. She turned the volume up on the TV, kept music playing at all hours, did everything she could to drown out the sounds that crept through the walls. But it didn't matter. The noises always found a way in. Scraping. Long, deliberate drags, as though something with claws was moving across the basement floor. Footsteps. Heavy, uneven, pacing below her bedroom like something knew where she slept. Breathing. Not just through the walls, but through the vents, a slow, raspy inhale, like lungs that had long since withered, but still somehow drew air. Jenny started sleeping with the lights on. Even then, she barely slept at all. And then, one night, it got worse. Because it spoke. She had just begun to drift into an uneasy sleep when she heard it. Her name. Jenny. Her entire body locked up. The voice was low, breathy, distorted, like someone trying to speak through broken glass. It wasn't coming from inside the room. It was coming from the basement. "Come down!" Jenny shoved her blankets over her head, heart hammering. It wasn't real. It couldn't be real. She squeezed her eyes shut, forcing herself to breathe. The voice didn't call again, but the scraping started. Slow, purposeful, coming from just behind the basement door. Jenny shot out of bed, every nerve in her body screaming at her to get out of the house, but something stronger, fear, kept her rooted in place. Instead, she grabbed the heaviest chair she could find and dragged it in front of the basement door, wedging it tight under the handle. She stood there for a moment, listening. Silence. Maybe it was enough. Maybe it would keep whatever was down there out. She barely made it back to bed before the house shook. 3:33 a.m. The walls groaned as though the entire house was being crushed inward. The air felt thick, heavy with something unseen. Then, a violent, ear-splitting bang. The basement door shuddered under the impact, as though something on the other side had thrown itself against it. The chair rattled but held. Jenny sat frozen in bed, her fingers clutched around the sheets. The lights overhead flickered violently, casting jagged shadows against the walls. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, silence. A silence so deep, so suffocating that it felt almost alive. She didn't move, she didn't breathe, she just waited. And then, the worst sound of all. A slow, creaking groan, the sound of wood shifting. The chair. It was moving. The next morning, Jenny didn't hesitate. She drove straight to the hardware store, bought the strongest locks she could find, and sealed the basement door shut. She even hammered nails into the frame, reinforcing it with wood planks, anything to keep it closed. But deep down, she knew it wouldn't help. Whatever was down there, it wasn't human, and it was getting stronger. That night, she made a mistake. She left her phone on the kitchen counter, forcing her to go downstairs in the middle of the night. The house was eerily silent as she padded down the steps, the old wood creaking beneath her feet. She felt exposed in the open darkness, the dim hallway stretching before her like a tunnel. As she reached the bottom step, she stopped. The air changed, thicker, colder, heavier. A faint, rotten scent drifted up from the floorboards. Then she saw it. The basement door was wide open. Her stomach dropped. She hadn't opened it. Had the lock failed? Had the nails come loose? Her breath hitched. Something was down there. Slowly, carefully, she turned toward the stairs, heart hammering. She needed to get out. Now. But then, she felt it. A presence. Watching her, a deep, crawling dread slithered over her skin, and against every instinct screaming at her to run, she looked down. And there, at the bottom of the basement stairs, peering up at her from the pitch-black void, two glowing eyes, unblinking, motionless. The pupils stretched too wide, too unnatural, reflecting the dim light like an animal's. Jenny couldn't breathe. Her body locked up in terror, unable to move, unable to scream. The eyes stared straight into her, and then a jagged, grinning mouth appeared beneath them, long, crooked, too many teeth. And in a voice that sounded like splintered glass, it whispered, "You should never have come here." Jenny ran. She bolted up the stairs, heart slamming against her ribs, feet barely touching the steps. She didn't stop, didn't look back, didn't think. She threw herself into her room, slamming the door shut and shoving the dresser in front of it. She didn't sleep. She couldn't. By morning, she made a decision. She was leaving, selling the house, never coming back. But something wouldn't let her. Every time she packed a bag, the basement door creaked open. Every time she grabbed her car keys, the lights flickered. Every time she tried to walk out the front door, she felt a hand on her shoulder, cold, unseen, stopping her. She was trapped. And the worst part, the whispers had changed. They weren't just coming from the basement anymore. They were coming from inside the house, from the walls, from the vents, from the closet. No matter where she went, the voice followed her. "Let me out, let me in." And then, one night, she woke up, and it was in her room. The air was thick, suffocating, pressing against her chest like an unseen weight. The darkness felt wrong, too deep, too still. Then she saw it. A shadow in the corner. Not just a shadow. This one moved, slowly, deliberately, crawling toward her. Its limbs were too long, its joints bending at unnatural angles, its neck twisted grotesquely, as if it had been broken and never healed. It reached her bed. Then it grinned. "You let me in." Jenny tried to scream. Nothing came out. The thing lunged, grabbing her ankles with an icy grip. She thrashed, kicking, clawing at the sheets, but it was too strong. The room tilted. The shadows stretched. She wasn't in her bed anymore. She was slipping. Down, down into the dark, down into the basement. Chapter 7. The Ending You Fear. Jenny woke up in the basement. At least, she thought she did. She didn't remember how she got there. Her breath came in short, panicked gasps. The air was freezing. The cement floor was ice cold beneath her skin. The basement door was shut. The only light came from a small, flickering bulb overhead. The shadows along the walls seemed to breathe, shifting, curling, stretching toward her. Then, a whisper, right next to her ear. "You're mine now." Something grabbed her arm, yanked her. Jenny screamed. She kicked, fought, clawed at the darkness, but it dragged her deeper, pulling her across the cold cement. She reached for the stairs. Her fingers scraped against the wood, desperate, but she was slipping. The last thing she saw before the darkness swallowed her whole was the basement door slamming shut. And then, nothing. She was gone. Epilogue. The new homeowner. Weeks later, the house went up for sale. A new family moved in, a father, a mother, and their little girl. The realtor handed over the keys with a warm smile, telling them how lucky they were to find such a beautiful home at such a great price. The family was excited. The house was perfect. Their first night was peaceful. But then, as the mother was putting their daughter to bed, she noticed something strange. The little girl stood in the hallway, staring at the basement door. She wasn't moving, just listening. A cold shiver ran through the mother. She stepped closer. "Sweetie, what is it?" The little girl didn't look away. She pressed her tiny ear to the door, listening intently. Then she smiled. "The man in the basement says hello.